Howdy folks, I'm Ben Starr, the Ultimate Food Geek. Welcome back to my kitchen. One of the most requested videos I get for my simple sourdough series is sourdough cinnamon rolls. Now, this is something you're only going to want to make a couple of times a year because these babies are rich and delicious. And of course, cinnamon rolls are a bit more involved than just a basic loaf of sourdough bread. But per usual, I have made the process as easy as it humanly can be for you guys. And you'll probably find that my method for making sourdough cinnamon rolls is quite a bit simpler than the other methods that you find here on YouTube. So let's get right into it. The first ingredient you need for your sourdough cinnamon rolls is sourdough starter. Now, if you don't have a sourdough starter, it's as easy as mixing flour and water together and waiting a couple of weeks. I just published a brand new video called The Easiest Way to Make Sourdough Starter. Definitely check that out if you haven't seen it yet. Now, all of my simple sourdough recipes call for sourdough starter that's at 100% hydration. That means that the starter is composed of equal weights of flour and water. Now, if you happen to feed your starter this way with a cup of flour and a cup of water each time, your starter is not at 100% hydration. A cup of flour weighs 5 ounces. A cup of water weighs 8 ounces. So it's entirely possible if you feed your starter this way that your starter is overhydrated and this recipe isn't going to work very well for you. Check out my troubleshooting simple sourdough videos on how to bring your starter back into 100% hydration so that this recipe and all of my recipes will work. But if you feed your starter by weight, equal weights of flour and water, you'll be fine. This recipe calls for twice as much starter as most of my recipes, a full 8 ounces. And for you metric folks, the conversions are right there on the screen. Also, this entire written recipe is available both in ounces and in grams if you'll expand the video description. Just click where it says more. Right underneath this video, you'll get the entire recipe written out. All right, so we are going to take 8 ounces of this sourdough starter. Now, this recipe will work best for you if your sourdough starter is sleepy and hungry, it's been living in your fridge and hasn't been fed in a long time. None of my recipes call for recently fed starter. The colder and sleepier your starter is, the longer the first fermentation is going to take, but the more flavor will be produced. Also, I never feed my starter until I get low and I need to make more. This whole concept of discarding and feeding your starter to keep it active all the time is total bullshit, people. You only need to feed your starter when you need to make more, and the sleepier your starter is, the more delicious a loaf of bread it will make for you. Now, of course, you'll notice we're measuring everything by weight. Folks, the only way to get consistent results while baking in the kitchen is to use a scale. So if you're one of those people that's still using cups to bake, get on your knees, beg for forgiveness, and then order yourself a proper scale. My favorite one is in the video description right below if you want to get mine. Zeroing my scale, and we are adding 6 ounces of buttermilk. Now, if you don't have buttermilk in your refrigerator right now, shame on you. Stop watching this video, go to the grocery store and buy yourself buttermilk. It's a way more user-friendly ingredient than most people realize. Like any fermented dairy product, it lasts for weeks or months beyond the expiration date. You only need to throw it out if it's got mold growing in it. And when you run out of buttermilk, you don't have to go and buy more. Just refill the container with good milk, leave it on the countertop for 2 days, and it turns into buttermilk magically. And whatever you do, don't you dare try to add vinegar or lemon juice to regular milk and think that that makes buttermilk. That does not make buttermilk. Buttermilk is a naturally fermented product. You cannot make it by adding acid into milk. I have a fantastic video on all things buttermilk, including how to make a really super easy fresh cheese using buttermilk. So make sure you check out my buttermilk video, make sure you go to the grocery store and buy buttermilk and that it's always living in your kitchen. And now we're going to put 6 ounces of it into our 8 ounces of sourdough starter. Next, 2 ounces of melted butter. A lot of the cinnamon roll recipes out there call for softened butter that you beat into the dough using a stand mixer. They say that melted butter will make your sourdough greasy, and that's just a complete lie. It won't. Melted butter is totally fine. We always use unsalted butter when baking, and this is because otherwise, how else are you going to control the amount of salt in your recipe? How much salt is in 2 ounces of salted butter? The only purpose in life that salted butter has is to sit soft on your kitchen table to be smeared on top of delicious things right before they go into your mouth. Unsalted butter is always what we use to bake with. Next, we've got 2 ounces of brown sugar. The reason we incorporate sugar with our wet ingredients is because sugar is hygroscopic. It draws moisture to it and immediately dissolves when it encounters moisture. So sugar is normally considered a liquid ingredient, even though it's solid when it comes out of your container. Then 1 egg straight from my chickens. And finally, a tablespoon of good vanilla extract. I don't measure that, I just eyeball it. Now we're gonna get this nice and incorporated. It's gonna take a little while. And now it is time for our flour. I am using an organic unbleached flour that I get from Costco. It's pretty much the only flour that I use in my kitchen. You can use bread flour as well, but all-purpose flour does just fine in this recipe. We are gonna add 1 pound of flour. All right, now we get the flour incorporated. And as this dough becomes too stiff to stir, we are going to switch over to our hand. Now, like all of my recipes, this is a no-knead recipe, but you do need to incorporate the ingredients into a cohesive, smooth dough. And that's what I do with my hand in the bowl for 15 or 20 seconds once it becomes too hard to stir. And yes, you can use your stand mixer for this, but why would you use your stand mixer for 30 seconds of stirring when then you have to clean your stand mixer? This is definitely the easiest way, especially in terms of cleanup. Okay, so we've got our nice cohesive dough now. I'm gonna spray my bowl. I know some of you have a very visceral reaction against cooking spray. You can use oil or butter, that's totally fine. But spray that vessel, and now we're gonna cover it. You want your covering to be fairly airtight, so don't use a towel. You wanna use a sheet pan, a pot lid, or cover it with plastic wrap, something like that. Now this is what we refer to as a rich dough. It contains added fat. Of course, with all that butter, buttermilk, and egg yolk, we've got a considerable amount of fat here in our dough. We've got these little sub-proteins in our flour called gliadin and glutenin. And once that flour becomes wet, gliadin and glutenin begin to link up into a longer protein chain called gluten. And with my methods, we let the dough develop the gluten on its own. We don't develop it manually by kneading it or slapping it or folding it. Rich doughs differ from lean doughs that have no added fat in their fermentation and gluten development process because those big fat molecules get in the way of gliadin and glutenin linking up with each other. This makes the resulting chains of gluten shorter, and thus we have the term shortening. Adding any kind of fat to a dough shortens it. So you should not expect to see this dough go crazy in its rise like you do with my regular lean doughs for most of my simple sourdough recipes. I want you to give this dough at least 12 hours. Even if you have recently fed your starter and it's raring to go, it is going to take a little bit longer and be a little bit more muted in activity as it rises because of the shortening fats that we have in the recipe. So you're gonna let it sit for a minimum of 12 hours, absolute maximum of 24 hours, unless your kitchen is really, really cold. If it's cold, you definitely have to wait until you get at least a doubling in bulk of the dough. But for most of you out there, that's gonna take between 12 and 24 hours. Now you'll notice that I didn't put any salt in this recipe. And no, I'm not atoning for the high salt content of my typical simple sourdough recipes. Salt is another fermentation inhibitor. And because we've already got so much fat shortening this dough, I really want it to have as easy a time as it possibly can in leavening this dough. The salt content for this recipe is going to go in our cinnamon, sugar, and butter filling a little bit later, and you're not going to miss it at all. Now, in terms of timing, it's going to take you at least 14, 15, maybe 16 hours to execute this recipe on the shortest possible end. Of course, that time we're just like ignoring the dough and letting it ferment. There's very little activity that we're actually doing to it. But this means that if you're going to be serving your cinnamon rolls in the morning around breakfast or brunch time, you definitely need to start this recipe the day before you're planning on baking, if not earlier. There is a refrigerator trick after we shape that I'll show you. If you happen to be starting this dough in the morning the day before, then you can shape the rolls in the evening and refrigerate them overnight to be baked first thing in the morning if you don't want to get up early to roll out and shape your dough. But the other thing you need to do once you set your dough aside to ferment is also set aside 3 sticks of butter, unsalted butter, on the countertop so that they're nice and soft. 2 of those sticks are for the cinnamon sugar filling. 1 of the sticks is for the frosting that is technically optional, but come on, if you're gonna make cinnamon rolls, you want that cream cheese frosting with them too, don't you? So also we're gonna set aside 1 block of cream cheese so that everything is nice and soft and ready to go when you're ready to shape and bake the rolls. I'll see you guys tomorrow. It has been 18 hours, and as you can see, our dough has doubled and it's ready to be shaped into cinnamon rolls. Now, this dough actually is more than doubled now, and it had achieved doubling about 11 or 12 hours ago, so I could have shaped earlier, it just that wasn't conducive to my own schedule. You can let this dough go about 24 hours. Now, for those of you who are worried about the fact that our dough contains milk and eggs and it's been sitting out at room temperature for a day, there's nothing to worry about. First of all, this dough is colonized with beneficial bacteria that are going to take any potential food they're given and convert them into compounds that are harmless to us. But second of all, once we bake these cinnamon rolls, they're going to go up to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit in internal temperature. And all we have to do is reach 160 degrees Fahrenheit for a couple of seconds in order to achieve pasteurization. So in case there were any potential pathogens inside of our eggs, and they have proliferated inside of our dough over the past 18 hours, in spite of the beneficial cultures that are in there dominating the dough, we'll get rid of them in the oven. So there's absolutely no reason to worry about a rich dough sitting out at room temperature and fermenting for a day. Now, before we shape, we've got to make our delicious cinnamon sugar filling. Take 2 of those sticks of butter that you left out at room temperature yesterday when you mixed up your dough, and those are going to be the base. So this is 8 ounces of unsalted butter. Now we're going to add an equivalent amount of brown sugar, light or dark, whichever you've got. I prefer dark, but I've only got light on hand at the moment, so light it is. And then cinnamon. Get a good quality cinnamon, folks. And if your cinnamon has been sitting in your cabinet for 4 years and tastes like cardboard when you smell it, why on earth would you ruin your recipe by adding that? Go get yourself some nice fresh cinnamon. If you really want to amp it up, you can toast your cinnamon in the microwave for 90 seconds before you add it to this recipe. That'll release all those volatile oils and really get them going. Now I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of cinnamon, and again, I'm eyeballing it. I'm not going to measure that. There's no reason to skimp on cinnamon. And remember when I said yesterday that we didn't put any salt in this dough at all? I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this cinnamon sugar matrix, about a teaspoon of kosher salt or so. Now, I like to start with a fork. Get in there. I'm going to set this aside and let's talk briefly about baking vessels. I'm using this giant Pyrex. It's like 10.5 inches by 14.5 inches. And this will fit 12 big, beautiful cinnamon rolls perfectly. Now, if you don't have a Pyrex this big, use whatever you've got. You can use a cast iron skillet. You can use pie plates. The thicker they are, the more they will moderate the temperature in the oven to try to prevent that sugar from burning or scorching on the bottom of the pot. So I don't recommend you use any type of thin aluminum pan. Heavy is what we're looking for. Glass, ceramic, cast iron, something like that. Now I'm going to prepare my dish with some baking spray. I know some of you have a huge aversion to cooking spray, so you can rub some soft butter in there. You can oil the pan. You could even line it with parchment if you want to waste money. Okay, now it's time to do the deed. We are going to fairly generously flour our surface here. And we're aiming for about 16 to 8 inches long and 12 inches wide. So give yourself plenty of flour. Gently remove the dough from the bowl. And now, in preparation for rolling, I'm just going to kind of stretch this out a little bit so that I'm in something of a more rectangular shape rather than a circular shape, which it's a little bit challenging to roll a circular shape out into a rectangle. So giving yourself a little bit of pre-shape here will help. A little bit of flour on the surface, flour your rolling pin. And again, folks, be gentle. We don't want to destroy this beautiful matrix of CO2 bubbles that we've gotten from our fermentation process. So roll nice and gentle. Don't get too crazy. Little bit at a time with gentle pressure. And do some corrections on the shaping as you're rolling it out. That is looking pretty good here. Just going to get some evening. And now we're going to spoon out some lumps of our cinnamon sugar filling all over that dough. One of my very favorite kitchen tools is this tiny little offset spatula. This is super convenient for flipping scallops or little gnocchi in the pan and for other applications that require some precision. I'll link to this in the video description below if you want to get one. And now we are going to smear this out, going almost all the way to the far edge, because that is the center of our cinnamon roll. But give yourself a bit of a border here on the side and the bottom. We're going to be cutting the sides off in order to get uniform cinnamon rolls. And we need a little bit of a lip on the bottom so that we can make a seam to seal the whole log once we've rolled it up. The nice thing about this little offset is that it really does allow us to smooth this out good and get it nice and even across the dough. All right, that is how it should look. Now we roll. Take the far end and gently begin to roll it over towards yourself. Try to make sure you don't get any large gaps. The dough needs to go straight down fairly securely onto the cinnamon sugar. And now I'm just going to run a little bit of water along the bottom edge of this just to make sure we get a good seal. Once the cinnamon rolls begin rising, they'll sort of lock themselves into the pan. But getting a good seal on this seam is pretty important in the early stages so that you can get them cut and transferred to the pan without them unrolling. All right, now this gets pulled up and pinched firmly. All right, if you notice that your log is fatter in one section than the other, this is the time that you can kind of pick it up and even it out just to make sure you've got it nice and even all the way across. All right, now you can cut these cinnamon rolls into as many as you want. The thicker you cut them, the taller they will be. I like to do 12 in my particular pan. And that's a good number to start with if you're unfamiliar with baking cinnamon rolls, but you can make them as tall as you want or as short as you want, depending on how many you need to make. And I see a lot of people slicing these with a bread knife. I've always sliced my cinnamon rolls with dental floss. It's way easier. Just get yourself a nice, like 18-inch stretch of dental floss, preferably not flavored, unless you can find the cinnamon flavored, that's totally fine. The first thing that we're gonna do is cut off just a couple of inches from each end to make sure we've got symmetrical cinnamon rolls. Now don't throw those away. I'm going to teach you a little trick here in just a second to use them. All right, now the easiest way to cut these symmetrically now, rather than getting out your ruler, is to eyeball the middle portion of the roll, and you just cross your dental floss across each other and pull it tight, and bam, it's cut. Nice clean cut. Although now that I look at it, this section's longer than this section, but that's also totally fine. All right, so we've got two sections. We're aiming for 12 cinnamon rolls. So I'm going to cut each of these two sections in half to give us 4 sections. And then each one of these 4 sections is going to cut into 3 because 4 times 3 is 12. So we'll go about a third of the way down and slice and get that transferred right into the baking vessel. All right. How beautiful are these? Now it's time to cover them fairly securely. Use a sheet pan, piece of plastic wrap or something. These are going to rise on the countertop for 60 minutes before baking. Now, if you have not gotten up early enough to do this before bake time, they can be securely covered. I recommend with plastic wrap and immediately refrigerated. No countertop time. Then you can leave them in the refrigerator overnight before baking the next morning. Now these extra nubbins, they're small and deformed, so they don't make proper cinnamon rolls. I don't tend to bake them in the pan with the rest of the cinnamon rolls because they're not going to bake evenly. So what you can do is actually just microwave them for about a minute, and that will expand the carbon dioxide and set the dough, and they'll be perfectly safe to eat. Now, of course, you don't get quite as proper a texture by microwaving dough, but it really does work. Check it out. I'm actually going to set my microwave for 90 seconds. And you can see they are getting quite a bit bigger. And we got some filling oozing out. Now, everybody's microwave cooks at a different rate because you've got different wattages and different brands. So I can't tell you exactly how long this is going to take in your microwave, but in about 60 seconds, my microwave tends to bake these just fine. If you're not quite sure, just take the temperature and your dough should be above 195 degrees Fahrenheit. Mine's at exactly 195. You just don't get any good browning in the microwave like you do in the oven, but it does in fact cook the cinnamon rolls. Now give them a couple minutes to cool down because they're just as hot as if they had been in the oven for 30 minutes, even though they were only in the microwave for 1 minute. But this will give you just a little inkling of what is to come. Oh. It's so good. Mmm, delicious. While the cinnamon rolls are rising, I'm gonna go ahead and make the cream cheese frosting that we're gonna put on top of the cinnamon rolls. Now, you can definitely do this without frosting, or you can, heaven forbid, buy frosting at the supermarket. But that stuff's artificially flavored, this is full of preservatives, and it's disgusting. This frosting recipe is super easy, only takes a couple of minutes to pull together. But if you're not going to frost your cinnamon rolls, just make sure you've got that extra stick of butter that we set aside last night softened and ready to go, because you're going to want to brush the cinnamon rolls with a little bit of softened butter when they come out of the oven, just to make sure they stay nice and moist. We are going to take this final stick of softened butter and put it into our mixer or mixing bowl. You can definitely do this with a hand mixer if you don't have a stand mixer like this, but this is very hard to do by hand. So if you don't have any sort of mixer, you probably should just buy your frosting. Now, I'm about to change your life if you have a stand mixer. This is the side swipe blade. And I have owned these for about 12 years. And in all those 12 years, I have never once reached for a spatula to scrape down the sides of my mixing bowl. Now, I am not sponsored by these folks. They don't even know that I exist. They don't even sell on Amazon, so I don't get a commission if you buy it. But you should buy it because it's genius. Now, on Amazon, you'll see a whole bunch of different blades with the same sort of purpose. They have like a silicone fin all the way down one side. Beater blade is the brand name, but there's a whole bunch of knockoffs. Let me tell you, folks, they do not work fractionally as good as this. So check the video description by clicking more right underneath the video. I've got the link to this company's website. You can order this, and trust me, it is worth every single penny. I love this thing. I have gifted this to so many baker friends, and they all are absolutely obsessed. So hopefully that's good enough of a commercial for you to convince you should get one. All right, I am going to beat my butter and cream cheese together until they are absolutely smooth before adding the powdered sugar. Now, they were both at room temperature, so that only took about 15 or 20 seconds, not too long at all. And then next we're going to add about a pound of powdered sugar. You can do this all at once if you have a stand mixer, but if you're using a handheld mixer, you might want to do it in 2 or 3 separate additions. I like to start it on low until it gets incorporated and then turn the speed up. Otherwise, you get a giant puff of powdered sugar all over your kitchen. And then before the final beat, I'm just going to add a little bit of kosher salt. Cream cheese frosting is exceptionally rich and sweet, and that salt kind of helps balance things out. And then a teaspoon or 2 of good quality vanilla extract. And I like to let it go for about a minute so it gets nice and light and fluffy. All right, now, the most important thing to do at this point is to determine who gets to lick the beater. Oh, give him a break. Oliver's 14. He can have a little bit of joy in his old age. The cinnamon rolls are going to bake on the middle rack of a preheated 325-degree oven, so get that ready at whatever point during the 1-hour rise time you think is best for your particular oven. I'm using my tiny little top oven here, and it preheats in like 5 minutes, so I can wait till the last minute pretty much. All right, it's been an hour. Our rolls have puffed up nice. They're giving each other tiny little smooches here around the edge, and they are ready for the oven. And into the oven they go. They're going to bake for a total of 35 minutes, but at the 20-minute mark, I want you to go in there and give them a rotation so that they brown evenly. And they're done. Oh, man, you would not believe how good it smells in here right now. Unbelievable. Now, as you can see, we've got some of that cinnamon sugar just bubbling furiously away. This is one of the reasons we absolutely cannot tear into these for at least 20 minutes, because they're going to reabsorb all of that goodness. And one of the things I really like to do while these are still warm is go in here with just a little bit of the frosting and just kind of kiss the tops of these cinnamon rolls with that. The heat of the cinnamon roll is going to sort of melt that frosting, and the cinnamon rolls are going to absorb it. That's going to add extra richness. Now, y'all, I am trying my best to improve the production quality on this channel, but I am a one-man show and I'm a chef, not a producer. The final scene of this video ended up with absolutely no audio at all, which is actually probably a good thing for you guys because you don't have to listen to the embarrassingly inappropriate sounds that I make while I'm scarfing the cinnamon roll into my mouth hole. It was not a pretty sight after I watched it for the first time, but suffice it to say, absolutely one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten in my whole life, and it always is. This is the easiest way I know how to make one of the most delicious things on planet Earth. I hope this video entertained you and helped you out. If it did, please help me out by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I've got so much more in store for you over the coming months. I'm Ben Starr, the Ultimate Food Geek. Thanks for watching and have a great day.